For oral answer, question number 1, in the name of Dr. Shane Reti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, what reports has he received on the international economy and its effect on New Zealand's economy?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, overnight the global dairy auction registered a 5.9% fall in the price index compared with the last auction a fortnight ago. That was the 8th consecutive auction to see a fall, and the average GDT price is now back to similar levels to those seen in late 2014, or around 30% lower than the recent peak in early March. Offsetting that somewhat is the fact the trade-weighted New Zealand dollar has fallen 19% in recent months. Lower interest rates are also helping farmers to some extent. Financial markets have also this week had to digest the unsettling news in regards to the Greek economy, with the Greek government being in default to a payment to the IMF and volatility in the Chinese equity markets. These again highlight that we cannot be immune to changes to sentiment and activity across the global economy.
Supplementary question, Dr. Shane Reti.
How well positioned is New Zealand in the event that recent global market turbulence and weakness should deteriorate further?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, we have in recent weeks been reminded that, notwithstanding New Zealand's strong relative economic performance and outlook, parts of the international economy are very fragile. The good news is we're better placed to weather unexpected developments than we were back in 2008. Kiwi households have been saving rather than over-borrowing for 5 consecutive years now. New Zealand's net international investment position, which measures this country's international debt, has strengthened considerably since 2009. Interest rates are back to near 50-year lows, which helps businesses and households with a mortgage. And every day we do the hard yards of responsibly managing our spending. We are on a clear track to surplus and to pay down debt. And as members know, this is very important to strengthening the resilience of our economy and protecting our people.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, in light of that answer, could the Minister tell us what the government's net debt position was in 2008 and what is it now? And if he doesn't have the exact figures, would he agree that it's slightly larger now than it was when he came into government in 2008?
First part of the question is quite in order. Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the member is deliberately misrepresenting New Zealand's external position. The important position is the country's net investment position, which was what I was stating in my answer, Mr. Speaker, which has improved and strengthened considerably since 2009. Once again, Mr. Robertson shows that he's all about the government and not about the country.
Order. Orders. Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Shane Reti.
To the Minister, how does New Zealand's current economic performance compare with other developed economies?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, it's important we don't talk New Zealand down, although that is a favourite pastime from some members of this House. The reality is New Zealand's economic performance is currently stronger than many of the economies we typically compare ourselves with. New Zealand's 2.6% GDP growth in the year to March compares with 2.3% in Australia, 2.4% in the UK, 2.1% in China, -1% in Japan and 1% in Germany. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the member might like to get himself a question. Average growth across the OECD group of rich economies was just 1.9%. So despite a number of global risks, New Zealand is performing well by international standards and heading in the right direction.
Supplementary question, Fletcher Tabuto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, will he now concede that his budget should be called the plan that is already not working, as it was a budget made using overly optimistic assumptions that in fact means it's a budget that will not work, now reinforced ever so sharply by the loss of $1.2 trillion off the Chinese stock exchange since June 12?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no. And it's important the member does note that the automatic stabilisers that do exist in the New Zealand economy. For example, The exchange rate, as I've said in the answer to the primary question, has dropped at a trade-weighted level of around 19%, and that helps offset a decline in prices for commodity exporters. And on top of that, the Reserve Bank has the ability to reduce interest rates, and we have seen that also, Mr. Speaker, and that's how a modern market economy deals with changes in international prices for its goods.
Supplementary question, Dr. Shane Reti.
What is the government's approach to strengthening the economy's resilience in the face of recent turbulence and weakness in some global markets?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, firstly, of course, the government runs a conservative and sensible fiscal and monetary policy for New Zealand. It also remains focused on progressing its economic development plan for New Zealand. These things, like ultra-fast broadband to 80% of New Zealanders, like signing new FTAs, the Korean FTA, and negotiating others like TPP, delivering on more skills that are relevant to industries in the areas of ICT, engineering and so on, rolling out key transport roading projects which improve the connectivity between our regions and our major ports and facilities, and reforming various regulations to provide certainty, timeliness and cost-effectiveness in investment decisions. These are part of the 350 action points making up the government's business growth agenda, a plan that is steadily delivering dividends for this country.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
With continuing falls in global dairy prices, would he agree that Treasury's downside economic scenario in the 2015 BFU is turning out to be the reality? And how is he preparing New Zealand for the blowout of the current account deficit, the loss of $26 billion of GDP out to 2019, and increased government debt?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no, I don't think he's correct in relation to the Treasury's downside scenario. While, of course, prices are dropping, the Treasury's downside scenario actually predicted without a decline in the trade-weighted New Zealand dollar or short-term interest rates, which has come to pass. And as I said to the other member, that actually has the offsetting for some of the decline in commodity prices. So the easing in monetary conditions does assist to protect New Zealanders from the less rosy international developments and does help offset the negative impact on New Zealand exporters. And as I say, that's a slightly different track to the scenario he refers to.
Question number 2.